And as you're lying on your back, please recall some of the things that you did last week. And notice, where do you go to first? What is the first thing that comes to mind? And that first thing that you remembered, is that the first thing that happened on Monday? Or have you landed somewhere else in that sequence of the 5 days? So what's your habit of remembering? Do you try to remember right from the start and then sequentially try to remember one thing after another? Or do you tend to remember a highlight and then let other experiences become illuminated as you make connections with that highlight? And then also notice, what is your habit of remembering? Is it, do you remember visually? Do you see and remember? Do you remember proprioceptively? Do you feel and then remember? Perhaps there was something going on in the room and you remember instructions and listening to particular conversations. Is that how you enter into that space of recalling and recreating? And then also notice, as you remember, are these memories just to do with yourself? Do your memories include what you are doing with others? From any of the lessons last week, can you remember a particular body position, limb configuration in which you were in, doing a movement from? Please go ahead and get into that position, whatever that happens to be, from whatever lesson you happen to remember. Just get into that position. Could be sitting, could be lying, could be standing. Could be standing with one hand on the ground. Could be sitting with the legs crossed. And when you get into that position, and as you sort of stay there for a little while, notice if more things start to come to mind about what you were doing, what you experienced. Yeah, so we've got quite a variety. Some people are lying on their side. Some people are lying on their tummy with their legs bent. Some people are on hands and feet. Ooh, yes. Some people have their arms in that kind of Egyptian pose. Some people have their legs crossed. Do you recall anything that might have to do with having one hand on your forehead and one hand on the back of your head? Do you recall anything like that? Could you get into any position that you can associate with the hand on the forehead and the other hand on the back of the head? What are your memories there? And when you take up this particular arrangement of yourself, do more memories spring to mind? Do you remember where you were in the room? Now, for those of you that always go back to the same place, that's easy. But if you're one of those people that tend to move in different parts of the room, do you remember where you were in the room when you had your hands on your forehead? Do you remember who was next to you? Who was behind you? Well, let that go and just simply lie on your back. You know, very often when we are called to remember something, it's in the context of, can you just remember that so that I can check that you know it, and good, that's a good mark. There are very often memories associated with getting something precisely right. But perhaps there's a different way of doing it, which is far more open, that you're just free to recall in whatever order you want, in whatever detail you want, and gradually let those memories be recreated until you get a fuller and fuller and fuller representation of your experience. And then you can re-enter that whole experience once again. Have you remembered anything else about last week? Something that you didn't recall a few moments ago? Please roll to one side, come up to standing. And now that you're standing, what comes into mind? What can you bring back into mind? What did you do from standing? Anything? Apart from walk out the door and come back in the door. Yeah, do you remember any detail? You can actually do whatever you remember in whatever order you remember it. And when you were doing these things, did you have a frown on your face? Did you smile? At any time, were you laughing? Hopefully not crying. And if you give yourself time, notice what you can bring back to mind. And you know, it's not just a time thing. It's an honest desire to engage in the process. So it's time and engagement. They'll serve you again and again and again if you give yourself the opportunity. They just do. Yeah, and some of you got your two hands on the floor and are twisting left and right. Right, now stop. And recall, is there any position that you haven't yet visited that you did last week? A body position, a limb configuration that you're in? Just think it through. Not a test. And if it comes to mind, go ahead and get into that position. And notice what memories come forth when you are in this new position. And it could be that as you're getting into that position, you go, oh, no, there was another position I hadn't thought of, and you shoot off in that position. So really, things can kind of ooze, ooze gradually. There's kind of like this memory ooze. And sometimes memories just spark. You kind of just ignite them, bang, 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 associations all over. Now, when you're not challenged to remember, because I'm not challenging you to remember, when you're not challenged to remember, notice how much you can recall. And some of you doing the dead birdie thingy. And some of you are on your tummies and rolling, bringing the feet to the floor. And some of you are switching your arms over from one configuration to another, lying on the floor. And some of you are moving from lying to sitting. Nice. Great. Please lie on your back. How many times were you asked to lie on your back last week? Can you recall? I think it was 151. Now, place one hand behind your head and place the other one on your forehead. And if you are more comfortable with your knees bent and your feet standing, bend your knees and stand your feet. And now start to roll your head between your hands. Just remind yourself of that a little bit. And each one of you has your own particular way of reminding yourself. Some of you go slowly. Some of you don't move at all. Some of you start to make big movements. And some of you, when you start to move yourself like this, you start to also think about, well, I remember what was said about rolling the head and the importance of rolling the head and using the arms to move the head and all that kind of thing. So really, memories are a spider's web. One little node in the spider's web links to so many other things. If you just let your mind sometimes wander and sometimes focus. Sometimes wander, sometimes focus. Wandering, finding a focus, exploring that focus, and then again, wandering. Change hands over. And let's go into perhaps a new idea, or maybe for some of you not such a new idea. As you roll your head between your hands like this, could you conceive, could you imagine yourself coming up to sitting? Now, this is not an invitation to do it. It's an inquiry as to, could you even imagine yourself doing that? Could you conceive of it? Switch hands, switch them over so that the other hand is at front. And notice what happens to your ability to conceive of coming up to sitting when you've changed hands over. Now, for some of you, it might not make any difference at all. And for others, just switching the hands over might make a big difference in your ability to imagine that possibility. Why should that be so? Please stop rolling your head, rest a moment. Imagine yourself coming up to sitting without rolling your head. And go ahead and do that. And stay sitting however you're sitting, doesn't matter how you're sitting. And put one hand on your forehead and the other hand on the back of your head. And roll your head again between your hands. And pay attention, how are you rolling your head? How are you using your two arms, your two hands to do that? And as you roll your head between the hands, does the head move relative to the pelvis or not? Does the head move relative to the chest or not? Switch hands over and continue. And now from this sitting position, could you conceive, could you imagine yourself coming up to standing? And when I ask you that question, does something happen in your diaphragm? Does something happen in your breathing? Does some part of your mind go, are you kidding? So just the utterance of a particular phrase, could you conceive of coming to standing? Does that have an effect on you? So lower your hands, stop, just stay sitting there for a moment. And please come to standing and notice how you do it. And now in standing, could you please put one hand on your forehead and the other one on the back of your head. And if you want to do this with your eyes open, do it with your eyes open. Otherwise, have your eyes closed and roll your head between your hands. And notice, as you roll your head from one side to the other, does your weight shift or not? And of course, once I utter that question, you might be influenced by the question. And that's a tricky thing, yes? When you hear a question, you could be influenced by that question itself. Can't be helped. Except you could notice whether you're influenced or not. So when you turn your head to the right, do you go onto the right foot? When you turn your head to the left, do you go onto the left foot, or you do the opposite? Or do you just stay in the middle? What is it that you do? Does your pelvis turn with your head? Does your pelvis stay still? Does your pelvis turn opposite? Great. Please lower your arms, rest yourself a little bit. So could you get into a trio? Trios. And could you tell each other, what did you do when you were rolling your head standing? What happened with your weight? What happened with your pelvis? So this will be part one, and we'll go into part two in a second. Okay? Quartets are fine. Trios. Form a quartet. Go for a quartet. Oh, there's a trio. 1, 2,